Brady, just talk about the spring. One of the issues with Florida down the stretch last year was the quarterback play. Luke Del Rio, the Alabama transfer, came in, looked pretty good during spring and the spring game. What's your thoughts on him and the Purdue transfer, Austin Appleby?
Well, I think, first of all, I mean, obviously Florida's goal was to create a competition at the quarterback position. The last 6 games of last year, they only had one option. I mean, they didn't have an option. So they did that. Luke Del Rio obviously started out ahead of everybody because he's been in the system as a red shirt, going through it as a red shirt transfer last year. So he had a familiarity with the system and where to go with the football, and so he kind of jumped out ahead. And he did some really good things. You know, I think the thing he reminds me of, if you look at Jim McElwain quarterback, is Greg McElroy. The guy, he won a bunch of games for him in a national title at Alabama. Takes care of the football, will check it down. He's a good leader. Obviously, he's done a great job in the locker room prior to getting out there, and he had a very efficient spring. Now, is he a guy that's going to be an explosive thrower? We'll find out. Certainly, they need some pieces around him, I think, still to do that. But he had a great spring. Austin Appleby came in, and the graduate transfer from Purdue has played a lot more football than Del Rio. Del Rio got a cup of coffee with Oregon State, but played a couple of games out there. But Appleby's played a lot of football, and that showed in the scrimmages when things broke down. You know, obviously it took him a while to come around with the offense. I think he's still learning it. You know, 15 practices, it's hard to understand all the nuances, and then also the personnel. But he did a good job, and I think in certain situations in scrimmages, you could see his experience elevate. He's a bigger, probably a stronger arm quarterback than Del Rio. So he gives him another option, and I think that's a good competition. I think Del Rio's the guy, but I think Florida's in much better shape right now than they were the last half of last season.
Well, another position that will help either one of the quarterbacks out this fall is the run game. A lot of running backs on the roster got a lot of time, especially during the spring game for Florida. What's your take on Mark Thompson and the other Florida running backs?
Well, I think this group is as good as we've seen in Gainesville as a group collectively in 10 years. Now, Florida had Cronkite and Scarlett on the roster last year, but they really chose to feed the ball to Kelvin Taylor, and it was not a very good offense running the football. When you look at it, the back goes for 1,000 yards, but the team only rushes for 1,700. So I think that'll be greatly improved. Mark Thompson, like most junior college players, there's a transition. You hope that the light goes on sooner than later, that they understand they've got to run over people, they've got to protect the football, they've got to do all those things that they couldn't quite, they could get away without having to do maybe at the junior college level. And it did. I think from his second scrimmage to his third scrimmage and then on to the spring game, he was terrific. And I think the only question with Thompson is, how tough of a runner can he be on short yardage? But I do think he is right there in the mix to be a major contributor for Florida. And I think by midseason, maybe the feature guy. Jordan Cronkite, I think, is a well-rounded back, great hands out of the backfield like Thompson. And Scarlett's a guy that can take it the distance, which Florida hasn't had a lot of guys. They got three guys that, if you block the front five and they get to level two, then they got a chance to go to the house. And we haven't seen a lot of that in the Florida run game. Even with Mike Gillislee in 2012, I mean, he wasn't going to go 80 on you. Florida's got three guys that could go 80 on you. We haven't seen that in a while.
Well, Brady, let me ask you about the SEC East because when they started divisional play all throughout the 90s and maybe early 2000s, it was either Tennessee or Florida. And then, of course, you had Georgia and Florida in the mid-2000s, late 2000s. And this, with Butch Jones at Tennessee and now Kirby Smart at Georgia, who they seem really excited about, the fan base, him coming in. And then Jim McElwain winning the SEC East first year, and he looks like he'll be a solid coach at Florida. This may be the first time we have all three schools maybe fighting for the SEC East crown on a level playing field at the same time. What's your take on all three schools going after the SEC East crown, and your thoughts on Kirby Smart at Georgia?
Well, after watching spring and watching all the spring games and so forth and just following it, I think there's a clear divide between those three and the other four in the division. It hadn't been that way recently, but And Missouri's they backed into one of their 2 titles, and South Carolina had a nice run there with Spurrier where they won 11-3 in a row. I don't see that. I don't see any of those teams competing. I think it's a 3-horse race going forward. Tennessee certainly extremely talented. Probably should have beat Florida last year. Heck, you go back and look at their 4 losses. They probably should have won all 4 of those games. They're a very talented team. I think that game, obviously in September, is huge. But I do think it could end up being who does better against the West. Obviously, all 3 teams play each other. They could split it up. And, the thing is, Kirby Smart goes into a great situation at Georgia. He's not walking into a program that's coming off a 6-6, and they got the locker room issues, and there's no talent. Georgia's got talent, and they're going to get the second best running back in the league back next year, Nick Chubb. And he just signed probably the quarterback of the future, who I would imagine by the time he plays Tennessee and Florida will be the starter. So I think, I think he's walking into a great situation at Georgia. I think it's not a big rebuild; it's more of a psyche type thing with him. And I think with and obviously finding the quarterback, get that kid sooner than later. I think with Tennessee, it's all between the ears. I think if they can find a way to beat Florida in September, then I think they'll win the East. If they lose to Florida in September, then it'll come down to Florida and Georgia.